Hello and welcome to Crime Bytes, the show where we talk about some truly bizarre and disturbing crime cases. My name is Liz and today is True Crime Tuesday. So last week we looked further into the justice imbalances that exist between males and females, particularly by looking at two teachers who carried on inappropriate relationships with their students. I've had enough of that nasty topic. So today we're going to switch gears and, well, can you imagine wanting to be healthy and beautiful so much that you would consider eating someone? Yep, I just said that, and that's what we are going to be talking about today. Those teachers are not looking so bad now, are they? Jeez. Today we're going to change gears back to murder, but if you think justice is going to be served, oh no. I mean, something's going to be served, but it's not going to be justice, unfortunately. And the first time I heard about this case, I just couldn't believe it. And now that I've looked more into it, just wait. So let's start by meeting Renee Hartevelt. Renee was a Dutch student who was studying for her PhD in Paris, France, studying literature in the City of Love. What could be more romantic? Well, not this story, let me tell you. Renee was a beautiful young lady with blonde hair and just stunning features, as you can see. She was also just a really smart and kind young lady, and because of this, when her Japanese classmate Issei asked her if she would tutor him in German, one of the three languages that she spoke, she agreed. His father would pay her, and she would go to his apartment, and they would practice together. So this arrangement would go on for a little, and it didn't take that long for Issei to develop some pretty strong feelings for Renee, which was understandable. She was a pretty incredible woman. But although Issei was a PhD student studying literature just like Renee, there was way more to him than that, and not in a good way. He had urges that, frankly, are not okay, and I'm not big into judging people and their urges, but he wanted to eat a person. So, this isn't going to end well. Unfortunately for poor Renee, her path in life put her square in the path, and then the affections of a budding cannibal. So, let's learn a little bit more about Issei now before we get any further into this story. Issei Sagawa was born on April 26th of 1949 in Kobe, Japan. He was born prematurely and was apparently so small that he could fit in his father's hand. That's pretty crazy. He ended up developing enteritis, which is a disease that affects the small intestine. He had an interesting childhood, to say the least. He had a younger brother who he was pretty close with. One game that they played as children was specifically interesting. His father and uncle would chase them around, and they would pretend to be monsters that wanted to eat them. Issei's mind would go from being terrified as a child, who was attempting to escape these monsters, to apparently wanting to be like them. He recalls his first cannibalistic instinct when he was in the first grade looking at a classmate's thigh and just wanting to bite it. He said that he knew he wasn't gay, but he was attracted to the boy like he wanted to taste him. This would confuse him about his sexuality, and he would confuse himself further by experimenting in that manner with his dog. And I'm just going to leave that there. He would go on from this little period in his life to starting to fantasize about women like Grace Kelly, which would be considered way more normal at that time. And I really hate that expression, but it would have, except that his fantasies about Grace Kelly involved eating her flesh. So there's that. So with this desire kind of awakened within him, he decided that he was going to act upon it. He found a beautiful German woman who he felt would be perfect to eat, and he followed her home. Now, this is literally what he said. that he was intending to do. To just take a tad off her buttocks and leave her undisturbed besides that. Just think about that for a second, the thought process. How? Anyhow, he breaks in and hasn't thought far enough ahead beyond this, because now he's in there and she's sleeping and he has to figure out how to just slice off part of her and get on out of there without her knowing. I'm so sorry. This one is just so absurd. But irregardless, he grabs an umbrella, and at this point she wakes up and is able to fight him off, and he does end up getting arrested for this, but he gets arrested for attempted rape, which makes sense. So at this point, he's probably like, yeah, I tried to rape her. I'm sorry. His dad would end up paying her off not to press the rape charges, and his true motives weren't revealed at that time. And life went on. He would go on to move to France to pursue his PhD in literature, and it was there that he would have class with Renee, who he ended up falling in love with. But what his idea of love included, these are just the things nightmares are made of. Up until this point, he had brought some sex workers back to his apartment with the intention of shooting them and eating them. But he could never bring himself to actually go through with it. Then he would develop this intense attraction to Renee, and the need to consume her would literally overpower him. Apparently, and this is really sad, but apparently Issei said that if Renee would have given him some of her pubic hair to eat and urine to drink, he may have been satisfied enough not to kill her. Okay, but how do you bring that up to someone? I'm really not trying to kill you. Could I get some of your pubes to eat? I don't even know. I'm terrible at asking people for somewhat awkward things, and she actually had already rejected him once at this point and said, let's just be friends. So yeah, he decided it was easier to just kill her and eat her. So the first time he attempted to do this, apparently he got up behind her with his shotgun and it jammed. So he finished their evening as usual and decided to just try again next time. On June 11th, 1981, Renee would come over and they would start their tutoring session. He asked her to read a German poem into a recording for him so that he could practice it after she left. He set up the system for her and then excused himself so that she could record it. He strategically set her up with her back facing to the door so she wouldn't see him as he entered the room again while she was recording for him with the shotgun in his hands. He would be successful in firing the gun this time, and the bullet would tear through her neck. Because she was recording the German poem for him, the gunshot and her final moments would be on record for Issei, and he would play them back for himself while he defiled her body. So when Issei shoots Renee, he actually passes out from excitement or fear or just whatever overwhelming emotions he was experiencing. When he did come to, he considered calling an ambulance for her for a second. Then he decided quickly that because she was dead, and he had fantasized this for most of his life, he should probably just go ahead and act upon it. So he started by having relations with her body. And while he was doing this, he was trying to tear into her flesh with his teeth, but quickly found that he would not be able to eat her without assistance, if you will. So he composed himself, got dressed, and went out to buy a butcher's knife. When he got back, he started cutting up Renee. He started with her buttocks and remarked about how the fat looked like a corn-like substance before he would get to the meat and just started devouring it. He remarked that the raw flesh tasted like fresh tuna. This is significant, and you will see why later. But anyhow, he has himself a time. He cooks this poor girl and tries her in all sorts of ways. He grills her, sautés her. You get the point. I'm going to stop now. So he continues to get his freak on and eat Renee's corpse until the flies come. Literally until the flies come. And then he thinks, okay, now I need to do something about this. His solution is to go out shopping again for supplies, and the best plan that he can come up with is to purchase a carving knife, dismember her body, and stuff her into 2 suitcases, which he would throw into a local lake with hopes that they would sink to the bottom and he would just continue on. He had put a bunch of Renee's remains in his freezer to attempt to enjoy at a later time. So then Issei hires a cab driver. The man assists him with his suitcases and literally remarks as he is loading them into his cab, "What do you have in here, a body?" To which Issei responds, "No, they're just books," and proceeds down to the lake. Now these bags are heavy and Issei doesn't have the easiest time getting down to the lake with them. Not at all. In fact, it was so awkward that multiple witnesses recount Issei attempting to just drag these suitcases down to the lake. He isn't exactly the tallest guy either. He measured just about 4 feet and 9 inches. So he becomes overwhelmed and exhausted and just lays the suitcases down and kind of takes a second to look at the lake and collect himself. He kind of walks away from the suitcases at this point enough so it's not completely clear that they belong to him. And he hears a voice behind him. "Sir, are these yours?" A man calls out. He turns around, looks right at him, looks at the suitcases, and he's like, "No, they're not," and starts walking away. So curious, the other man starts unzipping them, and when he sees what's inside, screams out, "Murderer!" The police are contacted at this point. An investigation begins. They end up getting a hold of the taxi driver, and he is able to corroborate with them and give them the address for Issei, at which point they arrest him, and he exclaims that he killed her to eat her flesh. So that's direct. They would find some of her remains in his apartment along with her ID and photos that he took of her remains in various stages. So case closed, right? Not at all. He was held in a mental institution for 2 years while he was awaiting trial and was ultimately found unfit to stand trial because he was determined to be legally insane. That kind of makes sense, right? So he was kept in France in a French maximum security psychiatric unit for 4 years. At this point, his lawyer decided to petition to get him back to Japan. When he arrives there, he is sent to a Japanese psychiatric unit where he was determined to be sane. So this would mean that they could try him for Renee's murder and ultimately put him away. All they would need was the evidence and information from France. But France refused to release the information because their decision was that he was insane. And therefore, charges were not pressed and his records were sealed. So after spending 15 months in the psychiatric hospital in Japan and being found sane, he just checks himself out in August of 1986. So that's a total of a little over 5 years in a psychiatric hospital for murdering and eating Renee Hartevelt. So Issei Sagawa was a free man, a man who admitted to killing and eating a girl without remorse, yet because of this extradition and loophole that he found himself in, he was free. In spite of this, he had the audacity to say that the stigma from having done this act was punishment enough. But that did not stop him from capitalizing it. He went on to become a food critic. I kid you not. A freaking sushi critic. after comparing human flesh to raw tuna. He wrote food reviews, had a biography written about him, and tried to write another true crime novel himself. Can you freaking imagine? But it didn't stop there. He also got parts in adult films and B-grade movies here where he was depicted as a cannibal. There was one particular adult film that he starred in, and it was like a reality type show. And he was living and banging this girl for about 24 hours in a house. And she freaks out when he starts to tell her about himself after they have already had sex. She was furious at the directors for not giving her a heads up that this guy was thinking about eating her. Well, anyways. So he kind of played out his notoriety for as long as he could. But after a bit, things would start to fizzle out. His parents would end up passing away in 2005, and although they were really wealthy and used a lot of that wealth to get Issei his legal help, basically ending up making him a free man, when they passed away, all of his inheritance would go to paying back their creditors, and this would leave him ending up needing to go on welfare for a few years. Then in 2013, he would suffer a cerebral infraction, which would leave him under the care of his younger brother and caretakers and having to eat from a feeding tube. He would pass away at the age of 73 from pneumonia. Wow. Wow. What do you guys think about this one? He literally thought he could obtain her essence by eating her. I can't even. I would say justice was not served at all here either. I think most people would probably agree with me. This one was just so wild from what he did to how he ended up getting away with it. And then essentially he was rubbing it in everyone's faces. He never showed any real remorse and would repeatedly say that he hoped to eat human flesh again before he died. As far as we know, he didn't, but they even let the man keep his passport, so I don't know. And that is going to do it for today, but as always, let's try to end today on a more positive note. So for today's feel-good story, we are going to meet Austin Perrine. Austin Perrine isn't just your adorable average 4-year-old. Every week he transforms into President Austin, a superhero boy who feeds as many homeless people as possible. He says this is his interpretation of what the president is supposed to do. He first learned about homelessness from a documentary saying that a baby panda was now homeless because its mother had abandoned it. He didn't know what it meant, and he ended up being shocked to find out that people can become homeless as well. From that moment on, all of his allowance money that he was spending on toys was spent on chicken sandwiches. When he passes out the sandwiches, he also passes out a piece of his mind, and he says things like, "Don't forget to show love." Hopefully one day we'll actually see this guy on the ballot. Anyways, great work, Austin. And that's all I've got for this week. I hope you all have a fabulous last day of April and that we finally start getting some nice weather around here. Until next week, please stay safe out there. Bye.